Hi, this is Kim Turner, and in this video I'm going to show you how to create a pivot table and then create a pivot chart that is based on the data in that table. So first, let's create the pivot table from data that we've already collected. I'm going to go here to Survey Results and select the data that I'd like to use for the pivot table. I'll select the data by clicking on A5 and going all the way to the end, which is row 262. Then I'll click on the Insert tab and I'll click on Pivot Table. I want the pivot table to go into PivotTables, so I'll click on the Sheet Pivot Tables and click on A4 because that's where I want it to go, and then I'll click OK. So you see here on the right hand side I have the field list, which contains the pivot chart fields, and on the left hand side I have a place where the pivot table is going to go. So I want to look at the survey results for the workshops of the conference. So I'll search for workshops. That's a heading in my data. I'll go ahead and click on it, and I'll make the selection results as columns. Then I'll put the return field as rows, indicating if someone from the conference will return to take the workshops or not return. And then as values, I'll select ID, because every single person has a unique ID. And then I'll take a look at it. So I have, of those very dissatisfied, 20 will not return, and of those that are very dissatisfied, 8 will return, for a total of 28 people that were very dissatisfied with the workshops. Now it's important that I name this pivot table Workshop Pivot. And notice I'm doing that at the Pivot Table Analyze tab, and that tab only comes up if I'm clicked on the pivot table. So if I'm not clicked in the pivot table, you don't see that tab. So make sure that you're clicked in the pivot table and then go to the left to change the pivot table name. Now let's create a chart based on this data. It's very easy. All I need to do is go to the Tools group and click on Pivot Chart. Now I notice that I'm going to need a 100% stacked column chart. So I can simply hover over each of the charts and look for the name that pops up as a screen tip. So I see a 100% stacked column. I can click on it and then click OK. Now I want to move this chart over to the report sheet. So to do that, simply go to the Pivot Chart Analyze tab and click on Move Chart. I want it to be an object in, not pivot tables, but report. So I'll select that and then I'll click OK. So this pivot chart needs to go right underneath the survey responses, and in fact it needs to be an E7 to I17. So here's E7 and I'll go down to I17. So I'd like to remove the legend and the field buttons from this chart. I can click on the chart, go to Chart Elements, and go down to Legend and deselect it so that it disappears. Also, these field buttons, you can go to the Pivot Chart Analyze tab and then click on Field Buttons and then hide all. We'll go ahead and add a title. So on Chart Elements, click on Chart Title and then start typing Workshop Satisfaction. So lastly, I want some of the data to appear below the stacked column chart. I'll go ahead and click on Data Table. Okay, so that's an example of how to first create a pivot table and then insert a chart based on the data from that table.